Dun, 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 dun. Dun, dun, dun. Hey, everybody, this is me, True Powers Mind. This is TPIM. It's our live. Today, we are going to talk about weaponized science, y'all. Did receive an email from a confidential informant in India. I just want to go on the record and say that what happened to the Muslim students there is just more of the things to come. Whomever's in power will wield it. So let's get into this. And want to thank you all for watching. So let's do it.
And also the purposeful development and testing of new weapons of mass destruction. And so this is how we tie this in with some of the other talks here at Sudbury. Because some of the infections that we found, both in civilians and within the military, have more to do with the development of new biologic agents than they have to do with the natural emergence of infectious diseases. So what kinds of things are we talking about? Well,
I hope you heard what he said. Hold on. Let me just replay that just for the uninitiated and really hear the words he used: civilian, military. This is a very professional gentleman. This is Dr. Nicholson, Dr. Garth Nicholson, actually, and a leader in microorganisms.
Increase in incidence rates of those that have been described previously are due to our increasing toxic environment. So there's also a role here of environment. And this has to do with our immune system and our endocrine system, and also the purposeful development and testing of new weapons of mass destruction. And so this is how we tie this in with some of the other talks here at Sudbury. Because some of the infections that we found, both in civilians and within the military, have more to do with the development of new biologic agents than they have to do with the natural emergence of infectious diseases. So what kinds of things are we talking about? Well, you've all heard of bacteria and viruses. You might not have, probably have heard of, in this context of this meeting, heard of small bacterial microorganisms called mycoplasmas. And I'm
Brother Wayne, Brother Marty, peace and power. Welcome to the show. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me today.
I'm going to talk more about them because they're one of the emerging infections that happen to be involved in a variety of different chronic illnesses. But they're not the only thing out there. I'm just concentrating on that because we've happened to have done a lot of research in that area. So chronic infections are often misdiagnosed or not even sought, and because of this, infections are either untreated or inappropriately treated. The fact that your GP, your general practitioner, really doesn't know much about these infections. And the reason he doesn't know about these infections is they're really not discussed in medical school any longer. They were 25 years ago, but they're not even taught now. And I know this because I taught in medical schools.
P Legal, Intel. Peace and power. Thank you for joining me this morning, joining us, the show. The Most High has blessed me yet again. I want to switch gears real quick. We're going to go back to this, but I want to throw in some visuals for you guys. This is the real deal.
Never seen anything like it. When it was unleashed on people in an effort to stop a war, all people saw was a blinding light, followed by complete darkness and destruction. It was August 6, 1945. It was the most powerful weapon ever created by mankind. Its shockwave turned everything in a 1-mile radius into rubble. It unleashed energy and radiation that killed 140,000 people in the industrial city of Hiroshima, Japan. As powerful as this bomb was, mankind has since invented a weapon that is hundreds of times more powerful. Today we have thermonuclear weapons, also called the hydrogen bomb. To give you an idea of its power, if the original Hiroshima bomb was dropped in New York City, it would destroy everything in a 1-mile radius. But if a hydrogen bomb was dropped there, heaven forbid, it would not just destroy everything in a 1-mile radius, it would make into rubble everything in a 10-mile radius.
Peace and power. Wow, 90th in Lamont. Welcome to the show. Glad you made it here. Now, this is the fire under the frying pan. But let's go back to the frying pan, because I think that's a little more prevalent to what's happening today, of course, with various viruses being unleashed upon the world.
At the University of California and the University of Texas for over 25 years, so I know the curriculum quite well. And these are things which are really not discussed. And you might wonder, why is this if we feel that they might be involved in a variety of different diseases?
Brother
So
Chris,
what kind of diseases are we talking about? Well, we now know that chronic infections play a very important role in a variety of different diseases. Now, the last conference I spoke, I talked about neurodegenerative diseases, and you've heard of many of these. They used to be very rare, things like Lou Gehrig's disease or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. You know, some 30 years ago, this was a very rare disease, and now it's not so uncommon, as I'll tell you in a moment.
It's because of the food we're consuming. What Brother Gregory told us the other day when I did the show, and he mentioned the world is laughing at you, United States. Over in Europe, they call your food Frankenfood because of all the GMO. Wherever fast food goes, chronic illness is right behind it. Keep eating them potatoes, y'all. Keep eating them potatoes.
And neurobehavioral disorders are going through the roof. Things like autistic spectrum disorders, autism, Asperger's syndrome, attention deficit disorder, and so on, mainly in the young. And the incidence rate is absolutely through the roof on these. And I'll come back to that at the end of my talk. Fatiguing illnesses, including Gulf War illness, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia syndrome, and other such illnesses. These were literally unheard of 20, 25 years ago. Hardly anyone knew about these diseases, and for the most part, they were ill-described back in those days. Autoimmune diseases, now very common. Rheumatoid arthritis, for example, is a very common disease now. It wasn't 25 years ago. Gastrointestinal disorders, genitourinary diseases, immunosuppressive diseases, all these have in common the very important role of chronic infections. And this is not always, by the way, acknowledged by the medical community. So what do we know about this? But the majority of chronic illness patients show evidence of chronic infections, and I'll show you some data on that actually. Viral, bacterial, fungal. In fact, most chronic illness patients have multiple infections. So they have multiple bacterial, viral, and even fungal infections. And those of you that have come to talk to me have told me some of your problems, and it's clear that you have multiple infections. Now, patients that have these infections benefit from treatment of the infections. Well, if the medical community doesn't acknowledge that these infections are important, you're not going to get treatment through the conventional medical services. They just aren't going to help you with these, so you have to help yourself. Now, many chronic illness patients recover from their illnesses after long-term treatment of their chronic infection. So these can be antibiotics, antiviral, antifungal, whatever, depending upon what the infections are. But those treatments are absolutely necessary for many of these infections. Because if they're not treated, you won't recover. And so the last point here is if these patients are not treated, they don't recover. So they remain perpetually in chronic illness states. And this is what we've seen in our population. We've seen people become chronically ill, and they're chronically ill for the rest of their lives. Now, the major pharmaceutical companies love this. Why do they love this? Well, for the next 20, 30 years or whatever, they have people that are willing to buy their products, which for the most part are palliative. That is, they can suppress the signs and symptoms, but they don't really go after the underlying problem.
Isn't that big pharma, y'all? We can take away the itching and the ration, but we're not going to deal with the root that's causing it. There you go. A customer for life. And they want to talk about ethics. But here's the other side of the spectrum.
This would be a total calamity. The world now has over 10,000 such bombs, capable of easily destroying every single person on our planet many times over. What makes these weapons so powerful? How do they actually work? That's coming up right now. The bomb on Hiroshima released an energy equivalent of 15,000 tons of TNT. The first hydrogen bomb released the energy equivalent of 10 million tons of TNT. While the atomic bomb, like the one that was dropped on Hiroshima, worked on the principles of releasing energy through the splitting of atoms, also called fission. See my video on that. A hydrogen bomb does something that releases even more energy, and that is it fuses atoms together. Fusion is even more powerful than fission. It is the same process that powers our sun. And when fission is combined with fusion in a hydrogen bomb, it creates energy orders of magnitude higher than fission alone, making the hydrogen bomb hundreds to thousands of times more powerful than atomic bombs. How does fusion work?
How does it work? And he's going to explain it. You know, the reason why I'm jumping segue, I want to get all this information to you guys as quickly as possible because it's pretty pertinent. Let's continue.
The fusion portion of the bomb creates energy by combining two isotopes of hydrogen called deuterium and tritium to create helium. Unlike a natural hydrogen bomb that is made of one electron orbiting around one proton, these isotopes have extra neutrons in their nuclei. A large amount of energy is released when these two isotopes fuse together to form helium, because a helium atom has much less energy when these two isotopes combine. This excess energy is released. One of the main problems with creating the hydrogen bomb was obtaining the tritium. Scientists found that they could generate this on the spot inside the hydrogen bomb with a compound combining lithium and deuterium. The result was a dry, solid, stable powder called lithium deuteride. So this is what most hydrogen bombs today use as their fuel. But how does the process of fusion actually occur? Ordinarily, the nuclei of two atoms cannot be combined because these nuclei have strong positive electrical charges and repel each other. This is why scientists chose hydrogen as the best candidate for fusion, because it has only one proton and thus would have less electrical charge than atoms with multiple protons in their nuclei. But if the nuclei repel each other, how do they fuse? It turns out that if you increase the temperature by millions of degrees, it is possible to combine nuclei together. As the temperature increases, the atoms speed up. But an extraordinary increase in speed of the atoms is needed in order to give them a chance to overcome their natural repulsion. The temperatures needed are astronomical, higher than even that at the center of our sun.
Now, once again, I don't understand how science was able to take a thermometer to the sun and take an accurate temperature reading, but that's neither here nor there. I think you all starting to get the general ideal. You create a standard atomic explosion, then that releases enough energy to start the actual fusion process. But let's jump back to the weaponized biological side of the equation.
And again, they love that because that means they've got customers for life. So they're going to make billions and billions of dollars off of all these chronic illnesses. So they're getting involved in all these chronic illnesses. They have all kinds of different drugs and everything. But unfortunately, very few of them really do anything to directly treat the illness. They just simply mask the signs and symptoms, make you feel better, get you back to work, and so on and so forth, and make you totally dependent upon the drug companies to maintain that level of lifestyle. So what I'm going to tell you this morning is that a lot of patients have these chronic infections. And what are we talking about? Well, over here on the left are a list of some of the bacteria and then some of the viruses on the right. And I haven't bothered to list the fungal infections. And we're going to talk a little bit about mycoplasma, but that's not the only one that is a problem. In fact, down lower on the list, Borrelia. If I were to make the list now, I'd put that up higher on the list because now it's becoming an increasingly important problem. Borrelia burgdorferi is one of the organisms involved in Lyme disease. Now, Lyme disease is a very complex disease, and there are at least a half a dozen different infections that are involved in Lyme disease. So it's not as simple as most people think, and its treatment is not simple either. But there are also various viruses that are involved as well. I'm going to talk primarily about the intracellular bacterial infections. So these are bacteria that get inside our cells, and when they get inside, they hide from the immune system. And that means it's very difficult for our immune systems to tackle the problem of these types of infections. The other problem is when they're inside the cells, they can interfere with various aspects of the cell machinery, the metabolism of the cell, the energy generation systems in the cell, even the divisions of the cells, the nuclear material in the cell. So we know that these types of infections are associated with multiple signs and symptoms, the first point here. That means that any given infection can cause a variety of non-specific signs and symptoms. And what do I mean by that? Non-specific meaning that you cannot pin down your signs and symptoms to a particular infection because the signs and symptoms are non-specific. So they could be anything from headache, neurologic problems like short-term memory loss or brain fog, aching joints, for example, intermittent fevers, low-grade fevers, skin rashes, gastrointestinal problems, even coronary problems, all kinds of different situations. So these types of infections often interfere with the endocrine system. They throw hormones all the whack, and so there are all kinds of endocrine-related disorders. They cause vasculitis. They cause inflammation of the vascular system, so people can have coronary disease, cardiovascular disease. Very common, for example, in our Gulf War veterans that have had these infections. And all kinds of different problems. But again, nothing that you could specifically say was due to a specific infection. In other words, a polio virus causing polio, that's out of the question. These are a lot different. So if we just look at mycoplasmal infections, just small, very tiny pleomorphic bacteria that doesn't really have a cell wall, and it gets inside our cells and causes havoc with our metabolism and other aspects of the cell. If we just look at a number of diseases, we find this all over the place. For example, in chronic fatigue syndrome, 50 to 60% of patients have this infection. It's probably much higher than that. But the tests are not easy for this type of microorganism. Autism spectrum disorders, different studies that we've done, different parts of the country in the US, 58 to 65%, fibromyalgia syndrome, up to 65%, rheumatoid arthritis, about half the patients, Lyme disease, up to 65% have this as a co-infection with the Lyme Borrelia. And then we come down to other diseases like ALS, for example, up to 90% of patients have this infection. So we know that in some of these diseases, like ALS, which is increasing, very high rate of increase in its incidence, virtually every patient has this type of infection. So we know it's important.
100 million degrees Celsius. The center of the sun is 15 million degrees Celsius. At this temperature, the isotopes become a form of matter called plasma. This is when the electrons orbiting the nuclei are stripped away from the nucleus, and the nuclei and electrons are floating around freely in a kind of high temperature soup. At this temperature, the nuclei can get very close to each other. And when they get as close as 1 × 10 to the negative 15 meters apart, then the strong nuclear force, which is present only at very close distances and is responsible for keeping protons and neutrons glued together, takes over and binds the protons and neutrons together to form helium nucleus and a free neutron. But how is a temperature of 100 million degrees achieved? This is where the fission or atomic bomb inside the hydrogen bomb enclosure comes in.
For movie buffs, 2001 Space Odyssey or whatever, the HAL computer kind of looks like that. Hold on, I'm going to segue real quick. Spirit's moving me to do this. Plum Island, Lyme disease, YouTube. Hold on, yeah. Once again, this is all happening in real time. So there's none of that cut and edit and all that good stuff. You're just getting it raw and, dare I say, sloppy. All right, let's jump right here. Weaponized ticks. Oh my gosh, hold on. It might already be gone. I had just saw a video that was explaining it perfectly. but they might have it way down. I'll let you man, I'm not seeing the one I saw. But Plum Island is basically a U.S. weapons laboratory, and some has suggested it was the origins of the Lyme disease outbreak. Because once again, Operation Paperclip played a role in it. The Nazi or the administrator of Plum Island was a Nazi scientist that conducted experiments in the concentration centers during the Second World War. So, my friends, we have to understand all this stuff is interrelated, but let's get back to the hydrogen bomb.
The purpose of the fission bomb is to provide the energy needed to heat up the fusion reaction to this 100 million degrees. So how do they work together? A hydrogen bomb is actually 3 bombs in one. It contains an ordinary chemical bomb, a fission bomb like the one dropped on Nagasaki, and a fusion bomb. All 3 work in concert. The chemical bomb initiates the fission bomb, which initiates the fusion bomb. To understand how the fission and fusion bombs work together, it's important to understand how the bomb is put together. In a ballistic missile, the bomb is usually located at the top, inside the cone portion of the missile. Here is where the hydrogen bomb vessel sits. The casing of the bomb is lined with beryllium. This acts as a mirror to reflect the neutrons back into the casing rather than allowing them to escape the vessel. A small atomic bomb is located at the top of the casing. It's shaped like a sphere. The top of the sphere contains conventional chemical explosives surrounding a sphere of beryllium mirror casing, inside of which is a smaller uranium or plutonium sphere about 4 to 6 inches in diameter. Below this atomic bomb is the hydrogen or fusion bomb. It consists of a cylinder made of uranium. The fuel for the fusion reaction, lithium deuteride, sits inside the cylinder, and at the core of the cylinder sits a rod of plutonium. In between the fission and fusion bombs is an encasing made of styrofoam. And here is how it all works together. First, the fission bomb is detonated by exploding conventional chemical bonds in sequence. This forces the sphere of plutonium-239 or uranium-235 to implode on itself. The implosion or compression of this material creates a critical mass, which results in a chain reaction of neutrons splitting atoms apart and creating more neutrons, which split more atoms apart. The chain reaction results in an atomic explosion. This fission explosion creates high-energy gamma rays and X-rays, which heat up the styrofoam and turns it into plasma. This plasma reflects off the beryllium lined walls and focuses its energy on the fusion cylinder. These X-rays travel at the speed of light, so they can reach the hydrogen fuel sooner than the physical shock wave from the atomic bomb. This is important because if the shock wave reached there first, then the fusion bomb would be blown apart before it could create fusion reactions. The heat and pressure of the plasma compresses the fusion cylinder, causing the lithium deuteride to react. This releases tritium. The tritium and deuterium fuse to form helium and more neutrons. The neutrons cause the uranium casing and plutonium rod to undergo more fission reactions. This causes more pressure on the lithium deuteride, not only from the outside in, but also from the inside out. This produces more fusion and releases more neutrons, which causes more fission. This positive feedback loop of fission, fusion reactions goes back and forth until a huge explosion occurs, ripping everything apart. Amazingly, all these events happen in only about 600 billionths of a second. 550 billionths of a second for the fission bomb implosion, and 50 billionths of a second for the fusion bomb. The result is an immense explosion with a 10 million ton yield, 700 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. And where does all this energy actually come from? Well, if you could weigh all the atoms of the fuel before the explosion and all the atoms released after the fusion, the sum of all atoms after the explosion would be less than the sum of all the atoms before the explosion. Inside the hydrogen.
All right.
So how did we find these, and how we get involved in this in the first place? And this goes back to the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, because my stepdaughter fought in the Gulf War with the 101st Airborne Division, and came back, and she and her colleagues slowly started getting sick. And in her case, she was training to be a pilot when the war broke out. And when she got back, she couldn't complete her flight training. She flunked her flight physical. So she eventually left the Army. And then she went on to medical school and is now a neurologist. So it worked out well for her, but with our help, she overcame her illness. And there were a lot of people who didn't and who were still in the dark about this. But we started studying veterans, and we started first with the Airborne and Special Forces units because we had access to those patients. We had good communications there, and this spread to other units as well where there was heavy involvement. And eventually some of our studies became multinational. We ran our ALS study. We used British, American, Canadian, and 2 Australian veterans. So we had a wide net there. So we were pretty sure that what we found was true of all the veterans that served, that received the military vaccines. We also started studying the families of these veterans because the families started to get sick after the veterans returned home. And that is another study which I'll discuss, but you've heard probably that military service, particularly in the Gulf Wars, was linked to an increase in Lou Gehrig's disease or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Now, there were a number of toxic exposures that happened during the first Gulf War and even the second Gulf War. And in fact, we don't find infections in all the veterans who were sick. We find it about half. So there were other things there. There were chemicals, some radiologic exposures, environmental exposures, and of course, biologic exposures. We concentrated mainly on the biologic exposures because we started studying the family members. And if you have an illness that passes to a family member, it can't be radiological or chemical, for example. It has to be biological. Well, this goes back to the old versus new thinking about chronic illnesses. I mentioned that we're not dealing with just one event here, such as infection A going to disease A, poliovirus causing polio. We're talking about a variety of these different infections, chronic infections, together with different immune competency states of the patients, different genetic backgrounds, different toxic environments, different heavy metals, for example, getting together and causing a complex situation, which we call a syndrome. And the reason we call it a syndrome is because it's not tightly knit signs and symptoms. They're very broad, very nonspecific, and so on. So we have to call it a syndrome. They're really diseases, but we call them syndromes. So in the case of the Gulf War, these were delayed casualties. Hardly anyone was sick actually during the conflict. Mostly they came down with illness within 6 months to a year and a half after they returned from deployment. So these fall in the category, these slow-acting chronic agents, in the broad category of non-lethal biologic warfare agents. And why do we put them in that category? Well, we put them in that category because several nations, including the US and other nations, have developed these as chronic biological warfare agents. So I'm not putting these on the list because we think they're agents that are developed for WMD. We know they are. In other words, they were researched, developed, and in some case stockpiled as biologic agents.
So hopefully you heard what the good doctor just said. This isn't a hypothetical. This isn't some sort of question. It's a fact. These compounds have been used, designed specifically for the purpose of creating chronic illnesses in people infected by said chemical, bacterium, virus, what have you. And it really upsets me that we should see men and women who have been victimized and receives no compensation for their infection status. I mean, do you not see the empire in which we live in? Melanated men and women, you are not going to get compensated for years of traditional segregation, racism, oppression, terrorism. American citizens, you are not going to be confiscated by unknowingly being infected by biological agents designed and developed with your tax dollars in covert operations. Hopefully, you understand what is being shown you. And the next time you hear some food talk about, let's get a couple of pistols and do something stupid, you realize you are attacking the system in its most advanced, in its most powerful, in its most conniving aspect when you take it on in the military approach. Not saying in some cases it works. Look at Zimbabwe. But in the United States and other nations on that level, it will not work. Before you could reach the castle to string the king up, them hydrogen bombs will be mushrooming around you. Before you could storm the secret facility, biological contaminants are going to be on you. Now, they got some that are chronic, and then they also got some that are instantaneous. This is why science is so invaluable. Instead of pushing our boys and girls into becoming the best soccer player or football player or baseball player, we should be pushing them to become the best engineer, the best mathematic, the best astrological student. This is what we should be pushing, because all the physical prowess of the world, even in ancient Roman times, did not mean nothing. As long as a weaker individual could think harder, can put together some sort of equalizer and come back with numbers, your strength means nothing. Because raw strength, without it being a part of a greater organization or a bigger thing, is selfishness. It's all about self. But now, if you use your strength in concert with a greater ideal or notion, such as liberation, now you're moving forward. They knew back in the 90s and early 2000, in 1991, they infected military personnel with bioweapons during Desert Storm. Yes, P-Legal. Yes, they did. But once again, we are still in the shadow of the days of the paperclip. The Nazis that formed organizations and consolidate power in both academia and weapons research, their legacy is continuing on today. Brother, the facts that over 98% of the armed forces are poor whites and black people who bring these diseases to their families for population control hasn't been discussed. Hannibal 617. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. That is so true. The poor whites, medium class, poor blacks, poor Hispanics, poor Asians, poor Native Americans, all serve this country. They'll all go down to the meth station with their individual ideals, but the common purpose of defending the Republic. And the Republic turns around and injects you with a debilitating disease, and then it's all hush, hush, mom's the word. Not on TPIM, SR Live. Not on this show. We're going to talk about, now I know the studio audience is in the background. This is just life, y'all. And you got to love it. This isn't a quote unquote radio show. This is the people's show. This is your show. The sister right now in your little pajamas on your couch, listening to the show being live streamed. It's for you, brother, out there. in that tent, listening to the show on that laptop. It's for you, my friends, all around the world, in different aspects of the same global beast that is besieging this planet. This show is for you, and the information is for you to disseminate to others. It should be quite literally clear right now who runs this world. It should be quite literal right now. Who are the goons? Who are the victims? Hold on one second. What's going on? Come on, stop fighting with your sister. She can have that. Let her play. Okay. This world is, so is the household. There's always confusion and turmoil and strife. But there has to be some sort of avenue, some sort of ability to bring order to the chaos. Now, when we're talking about these geopolitical matters, such as hydrogen bomb proliferation, atomic weapon proliferation, or even biological weaponry proliferation, you have better understand this directly impacts you and your seed. Some of the biological agents that were unleashed on the nation of Vietnam in the form of Agent D, Agent Orange, Agent C. Some of these compounds are actually distorted both the DNA processes of the soldiers and the Viet Cong and the civilians in the area. So here's the reality. If we do not rein in the power of science, then you will be on your knees. Just think about this notion for those brothers and sisters. I see. For those brothers and sisters who are religiously astute. Imagine an antichrist with biological drones, an antichrist with an economic machine where he or she can just print out money at whim, and an antichrist with hydrogen hypersonic missiles that can reach anywhere on planet Earth from any launching point within 30 minutes. I know. So now you understand what we're up against. Now you should see what is truly at stake. The military has just came out the other day with plans for DARPA to design a drone gun. That means now you can have a soldier in a facility flying around, probably maybe 2 to 4 meters off the ground, and then hold on one second. I need you to go over here. If there's no contact, then there's no conflict. So I need for you not to hang out with your sister for a second. All right. Ooh. Well, that just went well. You gotta watch where you're going, baby. Come here. It's okay. Oh, yes. Well, on this note, I guess it's all about the direction we're going. Not so much where we're going, but the direction in which we're going. We have to pay attention to how we're moving. A lot of you brothers and sisters out there are going to be invaluable in ways you have not yet realized. But many more of you brothers and sisters, if you fail to unite, you fail to consolidate your power, you're just going to... Okay. Oh, okay. Well, we'll fix that. You all are going to not shine because the system has collectively taken away your individual shine. It's only your collective shine that will matter. But because you have fallen prey to believing you can be the next Kobe, you could be the next Ice Cube, you could be the next Michael Jackson, you could be the next Eddie Murphy, or whatever the next is. You put whatever you would think you'll be. But all that is pumping up the system and keeping it going. My friends, liberation does not require oppression. Liberation does not require hatred, terrorism, torture, savagery. But liberation does require you to take a stand. And the first stand is the economic footing. The first stand is to start writing your congressmen and women. I'm going to do mine today. And tell them I'm advocating for the compensation of melanated men and women, descendants of slaves in the United States of America. Compensation for Jim Crow, compensation for slavery itself, compensation for modern racism and racist practices being perpetrated as we speak today. Right now, right this second, there's a girl just walked into a place, tried to fill out application, and it's going to end up in the shredder. And another person who does not look like her will come into the same place 45 minutes from now and get the job. That's going on right now. So you keep on playing your games. You keep on self-deceiving yourself as to believe a system that was not designed for you will somehow care whether you benefit from it or not. The real litmus test for where you stand in the society. Try doing something other than exemplary citizenship and see what happens to you. You better go by all the laws, known and unknown. Ignorance of the law is not a defense, y'all. Now, I wanted to play this Plum Island. Hold on. I got it. I got how to pull it up. Operation Paperclip and Plum Island. Copy. Hold on. There's a couple of oh yeah, that's a long ad. Hold on. Man, they're just about these commercials today. Hold on 1 second.
In any condition. Seriously, in any condition.
Yeah, seriously.
This is a story about clandestine operations, international intrigue, and jealously guarded secrets. It's about engineering marvels and technological nightmares. It's a big story, but it starts very, very small. Inside a cigar box full of letters. Melinda Hess is a filmmaker who came across letters her father had written in 1946. Her father, Sanford Hess, died in 1989, but in 1946 he was a young private in the U.S. Army, deployed to Fort Bliss, Texas, and corresponding with his parents back in New York City. The war was over, and Sandy Hess, a promising young mechanical engineer, found himself stationed deep in the Southwest, working on something.
Communicate. Some man you just can't read.
I had to bring this up. This is for Pete Legal and all who suffer from Lyme disease.
Эти неопознанные летательные объекты имеют вид не просто шаров или светящихся каких-то туманных областей, а довольно четкий техногенный вид.
Американцев всегда интересовало техномагическое наследие Германии. В этом никакого сомнения быть не может.
И вдруг происходит нечто необъяснимое. Экспедиция, рассчитанная на полгода, уже через 2 месяца спешно сворачивается и покидает берега Антарктиды. Это настоящее бегство.
That was a research scientist at Plum Island Animal Disease Center from 1960 to 1983. We worked on covert biological warfare programs. Even after Nixon ended all offensive aspect of biological weapons programs, we engineered human embryos and tested their resistance towards something. Dr. Herman von Buchholz.
And on that note, we're going to conclude the show. You know, you want to talk about what your tax dollars paid for, and you want to talk about what they don't. Every man, woman, and child who's been infected by the consequence of our biological weapons program, all should be compensated. All them poor soldiers, all the civilians, and all the victims. This includes TPIM SR Live for today. Today's date, February 19th, 2020, the year of our Lord. As always, y'all, live your life with integrity without hate, envy, or greed. Brothers and sisters, please, 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 let's try to be kinder to each other. Peace and power, unity and victory, dignity and respect. Liberation. I'm out.